This is the Brandon T. Adams audio experience. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Brandon T. Adams audio experience. I'm Brandon T. Adams, and today we're sitting with Trey and Angie Easley.
Hello.
How are you two?
We're great.
I've been waiting for this day for a long time to have this conversation.
Yes.
So for the listeners, just to give it a little background. I met Trey 4 years ago in Fairfax, Virginia, correct? Yep. Yes. And I was speaking, that's back when I was speaking to real estate groups, and you were in the room. I remember we met. You ended up, back then I was doing some coaching. We ended up working together. I was coaching you, and we're going to get into kind of just your backstory and everything. And then fast forward, Rise and Record year one, you came to, but you came to the city, St. Petersburg, Florida.
The city,
you never actually made it. You had to go to the hospital.
I did. Yep.
So then we'll get in that too. So I visited you in the hospital, and then you came to Rise and Record the year after with Brian Kelly. And then I obviously knew you, Angie, throughout that process. And then you came last year, and then it led to other things. We're going to talk about the podcast show today. So it's crazy where life takes you from a conversation to leading to here we are today filming and on the podcast. So today I want to jump in a couple things. I want to talk about your story, overcoming alcohol. 4 years sober. Congrats.
Yep, thank you.
To Angie, your story from crazy story of overcoming trauma and loss from losing your husband back 25 years ago in a plane crash.
19 years
19
ago.
years ago.
Yeah.
And the story of that, which you're in the process of writing a book on it as well.
Yes.
And also your podcast, Resilience Reborn. So a lot of things to jump into. I want to start Trey, and then we'll go to Angie. Trey, can you give your backstory of just growing up and what led you to where you are today?
Sure. A lot of it started, I grew up down in Roanoke, Virginia.
Yeah.
And I lived with my mom and stepfather at the time. And my dad wanted me to come up and live with him. So I did for high school years. And then, at 15, I remember my dad sitting me down. I still remember to this day where we were sitting. It was kind of a dark living room. Sat me down. He looked at me and he said, I got something to tell you. He said, your mom was in an accident.
Yeah.
And she's no longer with us. And I still remember that feeling. It was like it was shock, right? So I sat there and I just kind of stared at him. Didn't cry, didn't do anything. Just the heart was beating. So that memory is burned in my head.
How old were you?
15.
15 years old.
Yeah.
Where were you? In the living room? Where were you sitting?
We were sitting in the living room. Yep.
At your dad's house, right?
Yeah, and I remember because I was pretty pissed off because I had gone over to my cousin's house to stay for the weekend, and he dropped me off Friday, he picked me up Friday night.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't tell me why. So yeah, that was really a point in my life that I started, the journey that I kept on with. After that, I started, it was kind of an attitude of, it doesn't really matter because if something happens to me, I'll see my mom, sooner.
So you didn't care if you died or what would happen?
No. And years later, I asked my dad, why we didn't do therapy or anything. It wasn't a thing back then. But he said that he said that I sounded like that I had everything handled, which
really he didn't see the signs of you. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, and it's something I tell people all the time, is that if you have a child that's in that adolescent age and they lose someone that close, they're not okay. And I'm sure I acted like it because I thought that's what you're supposed to do, and I'm sure in my mind I thought I was, but it kind of led me. I started drinking a little heavy back then. Mm-hmm. Just recreationally, but I'm a bigger guy, so I thought I could drink more. So that kind of it set the tone for moving forward. As far as the drinking started pretty heavy back then.
Before we go in the drinking side and what you started doing as an electrician and then real estate, what would you give for, let's say, a parent out there that another parent passed away? What would be your advice to that parent to give to the children or help them cope with that? If they're going through the same thing when you were 15 years old, what's your best advice?
Yeah, I think if something like that happened to my daughters, it's got to be a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's been a big theme in our house is wide open conversation, wide open communication, and always show support. But at some point, you've got to take a little bit of initiative and say, hey, we need to go see somebody. We need to go talk to somebody about this.
Yeah.
Whether it's a professional, which, I've been to plenty of therapists in my life later on in life to try and work that stuff out, or people that have been through the same thing. Because I know I've had friends along the way that have lost parents a little bit older, and I could specifically tell them the stages that they would go through.
Yeah.
I said, I always say, just if you need somebody, call me. I can tell you what I experienced and where not to go, and what not to do.
So fast forward, I think 18 years old, did you leave home?
Yeah, so 18 years old, I bought my first house, and that was an amazing time in my life. There was some stuff going on at the house that I was living in with my dad, that I don't know. It didn't feel as welcome as it did before.
Yeah.
So I did, and he helped me. He helped me go out. I had actually had a down payment that I think when my mom passed away, there was like 15 grand or something from life insurance. Mm-hmm. From the state, because they had canceled life insurance because they were going through 30 days before she died, because they were going through some money problems.
Wow.
So it was something from the state, and then so I took that money, bought a house, and we still own that house today.
You still own it?
Yeah, I still rent it out. It's paid off, and
Wow.
It's been, and that kind of started my passion in that direction for investments and real estate and stuff like that. And but I did get my own house, but that also came with, I ended up drinking every night there because I was by myself. That's where all the parties would be because, Trey's got his house, let's go over there. Parents aren't there, So it was kind of a double-edged sword. It was wonderful having it, but I don't know that mature enough would be the right answer. Yeah.
I mean, I think about when I was 21, I had my first house, and I threw parties all the time.
Yeah.
And I used to drink quite a bit too. Not where I feel like I had a problem, but maybe a little bit. For you, and now you're 4 years sober.
Yeah.
At what age and at what point did you realize you knew you had a drinking problem?
So I could always outdrink pretty much anybody that I was around. The big joke was, if someone took a drink, don't take a drink of Trey's drink, right? Because it was pretty nasty to everybody because I would mix like 90% alcohol with 10% mixer. And I could function. And come to find out years later, when I learned more about my body and what was going on with alcoholism, is that our bodies metabolize alcohol differently.
Everybody does.
Yes. So especially in people that they've seen that are alcoholics, they can metabolize it a lot better than someone who isn't, right? So they say it's an allergy of your body. So alcoholism is a hopeless state of mind and body. So you ingest the alcohol, it triggers an allergy, your mind gets obsessed, and then that's when you continue. That's why people
that can't stop at
can't
one,
stop.
they keep next one.
Never. I could never stop at one, even back then.
But do you think certain people have, let's say, the allergy where they're affected by alcohol differently, where it almost is not meant for them to drink alcohol ever? I mean, alcohol is not good in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because We've all had people. We've seen people that at least if you're around people that drink, they can go a couple different ways. They can get violent. They can get sad. I was very mellow, very chill. Never got angry. Never got in any fights. None of that stuff. So in my mind, even when later on when Angie would say something to me, I'm like, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not. This is if anything, it's just hurting me. But I'm fine. I'm young. I can handle it. My body can handle it, right? But I do remember it was some point in my 20s, my late 20s, and I thought to myself, I said, man, I really hope I don't drink too much to where I can never drink again, because it was that important to me.
Wow.
It was that important to me to
get drunk.
So I knew. Was
it the getting drunk part of it, Phil, or was it just the process of doing it?
No, it's not the getting drunk. And, as I got worse off, it was more of a maintenance thing.
Because I'm trying to, for listeners that are, and Angie, we're going to go to you in a little bit, because it's interesting. I'm going to bring your story. I'm going to bring your story, and then we're going to intertwine the stories. And then we're going to go into how you guys together have overcome your own obstacles.
Sure.
So I like how we're going to do this podcast. So for a listener, I'm just trying to get them to understand if they're right now maybe have a drinking problem, where they can stay. Oh, that sounds familiar to me. That's something I'm going through.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways, very simple ways to figure it. Can you start drinking, and can you stop? Can you stop and then not think about it? Anybody can stop with a little bit of willpower, but does that thought just constantly like, man, I could use one more? Or can you do it more than once? Most people can get the willpower to stop. Say, yeah, see, I can stop. But can you do it over and over and over again? Or can you go to a party and say, you know what, I'm driving tonight. I'm not going to have anything. I could never do that. No. I would go and say, well, I'm just going to have 2. Well, 2 of my drinks that I made were probably equal to 6 normal drinks. I remember when I went to the liver doctor, he'd asked me how many drinks I had. I told him I had 12 drinks a night. 12. And he said, okay, you need to half it, then you need to half it again, and by the end of the week, you need to be down to 0. Well, 12 of my drinks was like a 4 or 5 count pour from a half-gallon bottle. So it was essentially, when it got to the end, it was really bad. So I was even trying, but I knew in my mind I was tricking myself into still getting the alcohol, because that's how sick the mind was at that point.
So Angie, when you first met Trey, did you notice Trey had a drinking problem, or was it hidden? It did not seem like an issue?
No, nothing was hidden until later, when he realized from when we first got together, no, I was having fun with him, right? And we were going on vacations, and we were young, and we were, hosting the parties.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until quite a bit after we had both of our girls that I said, you drink too much. You drink too much. And his response would be, I'm not hurting anyone. Because there was nothing wrong. Everything was normal. Our life was normal.
But you notice when you say he drank too much, is because he was always drinking?
Yes,
or
always.
He would drink and then act a different way, or he acted normal?
No, he was normal.
Because I've had it where when I drank a decent amount, my wife would be like, dude, you get stupid when you drink.
No, you couldn't even tell he had been drinking a lot. That was the thing.
I was to the point where I could drink a 5th of liquor and sit here and do this interview. You wouldn't have a clue, because I'd probably have...
That's insane.
I'd probably have kombucha or something on my breath, something that would take away the smell, which, by the way, people that think that the smell goes away, it really doesn't. You reek. Like I drank vodka, so you wouldn't smell it. But when you, like right now, because I haven't drank, if she has 1 glass of wine, I can still smell it 2 hours later. I can smell the alcohol. Yeah. So it doesn't go away. It's something we tell ourselves that we're hiding it. But to go back to what she said, when she told me that I drank too much, that I need to either slow down or stop, what that told my mind was, I'm not hiding it well enough. So my hiding spots got better.
So that's when it became the problem, is when I started, I would try, I'd try not to nag, but I knew that there was just an issue. No one comes home and drinks for the rest of the night every night, and then on the weekends constantly. Yes, and it started kind of creeping into, he wouldn't be present with the girls and myself, and if we did go out, with other friends, I would always drive and things like this. So it started to creep in, and I said, you have a problem. And that was like the trigger that he said, then I gotta hide. And then that's where it got worse.
So I'm gonna switch gears. I'm going back and forth. It's like the book where you read go left, go right. That's gonna happen in this podcast. But a couple of things came to mind, and just for the listeners. One, what I realized, so my wife, Samantha, who you guys know, and recently on your podcast, Resilience Reborn, she stopped drinking 9 months ago because she didn't like how she felt. And since she stopped drinking, I personally have drank much less. I still drink. I enjoy having a beer. I enjoy having a old fashioned, but I've definitely cut back big time. And the thing that changed my mind was you're talking about when your doctor said, hey, 12 drinks, 6 drinks. I asked myself, when was the last time, because I remember in September was when my wife stopped drinking. And we listened to this podcast about all the effects of alcohol.
Right.
It's really not good.
Yeah.
And so I looked and I realized, I don't remember the last time I went 7 days without having any alcohol. And so when I realized that, dude, there's something wrong with that. And so I went I think 2 weeks without alcohol. And it felt good not drinking. I also, especially because when you're traveling like me, you're hosting things, all these different things, it's difficult. But for the listeners, ask yourself, if you have drinking here and there, when was the last time you went at least 1 week without one drip of alcohol? And that for me was like, whoa,
Yeah.
I need to be acknowledging that, because that simple thing made me a wake up call, like, oh, I'm actually, even if it's 1 or 2 beers here and there, that happens 4 nights a week. There's something wrong with that.
Yeah, there maybe, right? In my mind, so, because I've seen both sides now, and I would never tell anybody to put my opinions on somebody like, oh,
You get a point, yeah.
you drink too much, you need to stop. No. So, but what people don't understand is there's an invisible line. You don't know where it is. You don't know when you're going to cross it. But when you do cross it, there's no going back.
Yeah.
You go from wanting alcohol to needing alcohol. And that is hell, right? So that is literal hell, where for me, I would stay in bed as long as I could every single morning until you'd be at work, I'd drop the kids off, I'd probably get sick, I'd come home, lay in bed, sweat, cry, try and lay there, because I knew the sooner I got out of bed, the sooner I would have to take a drink in order to even type or function.
So it's almost 4 years that you've been sober. And it was almost exactly 4 years ago, a little before, that I started working with you as a coach, and back when I did coaching. And it was when COVID hit. And I remember, and I didn't understand it at first. And it was, I think, you asking for help, but I first time I ever experienced that. You were drinking.
Yes.
Behind Angie's back.
Yeah.
You went into the sauna, I remember. And I think I don't know if you told me these things.
Yeah.
And I first didn't know how to tackle this, because I was working with you on the business branding side.
Yep.
But I remember it very clearly. And you would tell me, hey, I'm hiding this. I'm drinking some alcohol, and little things that showed up. And for me too, actually, now that I look back, I feel bad, because there was times where, I was going to drink or stuff, things that I should have never been saying. But now I now 4 years later, but I see what you two went through, and we've become family in this triangle, or whatever you call it. But it's interesting to see and how far you've come to now. Alcohol is not even a thought, right?
Yeah, no, so I ended up, because I tried several times on my own, and it would stick for a couple weeks. Yeah. Like even when we were working together, I believe I was in the middle of a sobriety point. Because there was a point where I told my doctor,
Yeah.
and he was the first person I told, and I suggest to anybody who's having a problem, tell your doctor first. If you have a good doctor, he's going to be there to support you. He even gave me some advice. He said I could bring Angie in, and because this is something that you don't want to, and this is for like people on Angie's side. If you get angry, if you start yelling, if you start getting pissed off, it will drive them even deeper.
It doesn't help.
It doesn't help, but it's hard not to, right? Because she was so frustrated, and she's like, I told you. Yeah, but you can't tell an alcoholic or an addict something like that. And unfortunately, there may be many bottoms before they hit before they can actually realize they need to get something done. Okay,
I'm gonna transition here, and we're gonna come back to this because I want to talk about how you did become sober. This is really powerful stuff. Angie, let's go into your story and pull you into the picture here. Tell me your story from the start and leading to meeting Trey.
Okay. So had a really awesome childhood growing up. Met this wonderful guy named Kyle.
Yeah.
And we got married, and then in 2005, February, he died in a plane crash with Circuit City. And that left me, I don't even know how I was then.
Yeah.
Just my whole entire world it crashed, it was gone. And so fast forward about a year and a half later, Trey and I connected. And we had known each other in middle school. We went to middle school together, and we reconnected on MySpace, and we talked for about...
It was almost a year.
A year.
Yeah.
And
just over direct message.
Yes.
Never on the phone.
And so then finally, will you go out with me? Yes. And so I did, and then things kind of quickly progressed. Within, I think, 6 months, we were engaged.
Oh, wow.
And then got married. We waited a year to get married. So we got married in 2009. And I mean, for me, he was everything that I didn't have before. Completely different lifestyle. I was running, and I wanted the furthest from what I had. I didn't want anything that resembled that because I had so many, just anger, guilt, all the things in my life. And we built our dream house together, and we started having kids right away because we were a little bit older. And
you were a little bit older.
And then, and I, like I said, I had always told him I drank some, but it was never a lot. It was, and so I always had told him throughout our entire marriage, I think you drink too much, and he's like, well, what do you know? Things like that. It's fine. There's nothing wrong. All of our vacations had to be all inclusive, because that's what he wanted, and, we were the party house. We threw all the parties, and people came, and we hosted everything. And then it just quickly, once he got out of electrical work and he got into real estate, that was the shift for him.
So before we dive into that, you as a couple, you went quick in your story. I mean,
oh, sorry.
You're good, but the plane crash,
yes.
your husband
yes.
died in the plane crash. But the thing that's very crazy about this is you had a premonition.
Yes, I
You
did.
knew it was going to happen.
I did.
So share
Okay.
the day you realize, hey, your husband at the time was going to go on a plane and crash.
Yes. So he had gotten this promotion within Circuit City. He had already been, he flew. They flew to the Sony plant. He was the one who helped purchase computers for Circuit City. And so he had flown on commercial airlines before, and he came home, he got a promotion. He said, I get to ride on the corporate jet. And I thought about it, and I immediately said, you can't go. And he just looked at me like I was crazy.
Yeah.
What do you mean I can't go? And I said, you can go if you take a commercial airline, but this private jet thing, I don't have a good feeling and I don't think that you should go. So maybe you can tell him just to go on a regular airline. And he thought I was crazy. And
I mean, if I was in his shoes, I would probably think like, what are you going to tell me? You know?
Oh yeah. And
even though I get your point.
He 100% dismissed me. And I just left as it was. And then I think in January, so that was in December of 2004. January 2005, I brought it up again, and it caused kind of an argument. And he said, that's just never going to happen. And it's just not up for discussion anymore. I'm going. So the days leading up to it, I just had this feeling, like it was like my whole life kind of shifted, and I just felt this overwhelming feeling of just unsettled. And so on the 15th, no, the 14th, because that was Valentine's Day, he had this nice meal for me when I came home, and I knew that it was the last time that I would be with him, that I would see with him.
Like you were for sure in your mind.
I
He's
knew
still alive.
I knew it.
But the next day he's going on a plane.
Yes. So on the 15th, that night, he went to bed really early, and I went and cut his alarm off. And I went back downstairs, and it overtook my mind that he was going to hate me if he didn't wake up for that flight. I thought he would divorce me, and he would never forgive me for doing that, so I went and cut his alarm back on. And then hours later, that next day, I got the phone call at school that the plane actually crashed.
So he left that morning.
Mm-hmm.
What time was it when you got the call?
Oh, I don't even remember. I want to say like lunchtime, afternoonish time.
So you got the phone call, and when you got the phone call, you already knew.
I did. I was in an intense rehearsal with my students. I hated interruptions, and the phone rang, and so my student went to get the phone, and they said they need you on the phone, and I said, no, I'm teaching, and they said, no, they need you. So I went to the phone, and what had happened was this person called in and just said they needed to speak to me. The office staff had no idea who it was or anything, and so they said, we need you to come to the office. So I went to the office, and then I picked up the phone there with this guy on the other end telling me everything I already knew. As you know, your husband was on a plane, and it crashed, and there are no survivors.
And that was it.
That was it. And
what's your response? Did you even say anything?
I think that I paused for a moment, and then it went into all different, I was screaming, I was crying, this isn't true, all the things. And I was so out of sorts that they took the phone from me, I think, and hung up, I guess, I don't know, and took me back to a conference room.
Wow.
Yeah. That is pretty much a blur. I remember the sound of his voice, I remember his name, and I remember him telling me what I had known, but I wasn't believing him.
What was the next 2 years of your life after going from, hey, you see your husband, to the next day dying in a plane crash, which you said was going to happen?
Awful.
What? Give us a picture of exactly what your life looked like on a day in, day out basis.
So lots of attorneys, legal stuff, going to the crash site.
How did you cope? I mean, did you turn to any drugs, alcohol? What was your mechanism to?
I did not want to be alive. Mm-hmm. I thought for sure that I should be the one that was dead, not him. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have any reason for living. That was my thought. I should just go because he did. This was supposed to be my life. All the things that I had to encounter, like I said, I was really, really, really blessed growing up. My parents took care of everything. And then I got into a relationship with him. He took care of me beyond belief. I hadn't paid bills before, like all the things. And I didn't know how to manage my life. my parents were my saving grace. They came and they stayed with me for a really long while. I ended up selling my house about 6 months later that we had built together, and moving into a smaller place that I didn't really have to manage and do yard work and things like that. And, you know, it was just, I stayed out of work for a while, but then I went back to work, but I don't think I really worked. I remember, you know, my one set of my girls' choir, they were my everything, and they just held me up. There were so many people that were there for me, but the moment that I had to like return back to normal life and keep living and take care of all the things, you know, it kind of just.
What would, I know everybody has their own unique thing, but if somebody is listening right now that had the similar thing happen, they lost a loved one unexpectedly, what would be your advice to them to be able to cope and get through the hellish experience?
I think probably leaning into those people that are there to support you. I think that I did that somewhat. I did have a therapist right away, but these are all things that people kind of pushed on me. And anybody that I feel that is there to offer you some sort of support that you feel is helpful, because there were lots of people around, right? There were lots of people that wanted to be there for me, that wanted to help me, but it wasn't what I felt I needed.
Yeah.
Also to be okay, to not be okay. I still to this day feel like that society has this, the way that you should grieve or the way that you should cope, or, how long, or